Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. You're tuned in here with us at Safe Passage for Children of Minnesota's free webinar featuring Mark Gordon. My name is Stephanie McCorkle, and I'm the Safe Passage for Children of Minnesota Operations Manager and Volunteer Coordinator. And our mission here at Safe Passage for Children is to strengthen the Minnesota child welfare system so that children are safe and can reach their full potential. We invite all of you to please join us at our fall fundraiser virtual gathering. It's our annual coming together for all of our supporters, old and new, coming up on Wednesday, October 13th, and that's at 12 p.m. and it's actually on Zoom. So you can attend from anywhere in the world. If you want to find out more about that, just visit our website, and that's at safepassageforchildren.org. And on our website, you can also sign up for our mailing list, subscribe to our weekly blogs and podcasts. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. In 2 weeks, we're going to have a very special webinar coming up on October 20th featuring Eric Rasmussen of Care 11 News. And he is an investigative reporter. You may recognize his name from the recent investigations involving 8-year-old Autumn Hollow of Minnesota. He'll be giving us an inside look kind of behind the scenes at how investigative reporting is done and, give us kind of an inside peek on how you find your story in investigative reporting, find sources, interview them, things like that. So it should be a really, really interesting webinar. And again, that's coming up in 2 weeks on Wednesday, October 20th. So be able to check out our social media channels and also website. We'll have information about that soon. We'll also send out some emails when we're ready to register you for that. Just a couple of reminders about this webinar. This webinar is being recorded. Please mute your microphone until our Q&A time after our presentation has finished. And after the presentation, we'll have Q&A. You can use the chat box or feel free to just ask your questions. So after all of that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark. Thanks a lot for being here, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for starting things off. And thank you, everybody, for joining us as I'm looking at the list of the participants, and I'm seeing some friendly and familiar faces. And so thank you very much for joining us. I am really honored to be among such an illustrious group, and I want to thank you, Stephanie, for your role. I, of course, want to thank Rich German for all of the passion that he brings to his advocacy role and to Safe Passage. And, I also want to acknowledge, two people who I think have been very involved in Safe Passage, Jane Ranham and Patty Moses. They have actually been very, very, they're clearly so committed and so knowledgeable on this topic. And they've been very helpful to me in helping to explain to me different perspectives and approaches. Having said that, I want to be clear that I'm sure there are things that I will be saying that they don't necessarily agree with. So I do not mean to imply that, but their assistance and advice has really expanded my understanding in some critical areas, and I'm really grateful for that. So I frankly got into this whole area through mentoring. I have been mentoring youth for certainly over a decade, and actually starting in 2019, I started working with Jessica Rogers, who is actually on this, the executive director at C2I, who is an inspired leader of C2I, and we worked together to set up a mentoring program for teens aging out of foster care. It's called OG Mentoring, and we actually have a whole series of mentors who are now working with youth who are aging out, and we have more and more who are being trained and who are being matched. As part of that whole effort, I just spent a lot of time speaking with so many people involved in foster care and in child welfare generally, and I was struck by the commitment and the dedication that everybody brings. But I was also struck by how everyone, from whatever their perspective, whether they were from counties or advocacy groups or judges or whatever it might be, everyone thought that the outcomes were suboptimal at best. in terms of outcomes of the system in a whole series of situations. And so I took that and added to that my own passion, having worked with teenage and older youth, and frankly, having seen directly the negative impacts of trauma in their lives. And I really listened closely and spoke to several hundred people, whether they be advocates, judges, county and state officials, youth who'd been in the system, nonprofits. I was struck by, on a certain level, there was a lot of disagreement in terms of what needs to be done, but there was also significant common ground in a really wide range of areas. And frankly, and maybe this represents hubris on my part, I was silly enough to think that I might be able to make a contribution toward finding common ground, that maybe my own ignorance in this area, whenever I'm speaking about foster care and child welfare to a group such as this, I always assume that I am the person in the room who knows the least about the topic. But I thought maybe I could use my ignorance as a plus. And so, I was on sabbatical actually at the time, and I set up two groups. One, a group made up of leaders of business, arts, sports, law, healthcare, individuals who are not usually involved in this area, but who, frankly, at my request, agreed that they would advocate as community leaders for any proposal we would come up with in which we really could find meaningful common ground to make a significant difference in the foster care system. And the task of trying to find that common ground was left to an informal working group, which I was honored enough to set up and be part of. And over time, that grew actually to several dozen people. I should mention that everybody on that working group, while I'm going to tell you about what some of their affiliations were, they were acting in their own personal capacities. They were not acting as official representatives of their organizations, because that gave everybody the flexibility to think outside the box and to think more broadly. But so we've had on that group, people from DHS at various points. We've had, I think, up to 9 different counties that have been represented in terms of people, from the county level working on child welfare issues. We've had county attorneys and members of their staffs. We've had judges, academics, nonprofits, advocates and providers, youth who have been involved directly in the system, and representatives of the most disproportionately impacted communities here in Minnesota. And our goal really has been to find common ground and then to explore whether there might be avenues to translate that common ground into policy, whether through legislation or otherwise. The ground rules that we set were pretty simple. First, our goal is not to design the perfect system. There is no perfect system, but we wanted one where everybody from a whole series of different perspectives could agree that this system would move us a significant step forward in terms of the things that they cared about the most. Another ground rule was that we didn't have to struggle to be innovative. Sometimes there's a lot of emphasis on, let's come up with something new, et cetera. The truth is there are a whole series of really great ideas which have been bubbling up in this space for the last several decades. And in some cases, there just hasn't been the commitment to implement them. In other cases, frankly, there have not been the resources that have been made available in order to implement them. So we did not set for ourselves a goal of coming up with some brilliant new idea, but rather, as I say, of finding common ground among existing ideas. Another ground rule was that whatever we come up with has to be, you can call it either bipartisan or you can call it nonpartisan. There is no Democratic and no Republican way to love your kids. And we really wanted to reflect that in the workings of the group. And I think perhaps most importantly, we wanted to really keep the best interests of children and of child welfare at the forefront. Because after all, the goal is better outcomes for our youth. And if we can't achieve better outcomes, then we shouldn't be working toward any changes. And I wanted to speak with you, and I was really delighted that Rich invited me to, because frankly, I think we have found common ground on a wide range of issues and areas, and I want to share that with you and then get your further input and advice. So with your permission, I'm going to just jump right into talking about the areas of common ground among a whole series of different players. And one area that frankly jumped out right at the beginning was that everybody could agree that we needed to make a much more serious effort and put much more significant resources into prevention. You know, the best foster care system is one that doesn't have any kids in it, right? And the reason it doesn't have any kids in it is because we have been able to create, you know, help families and others create safe, secure, and loving environments for children where they can really thrive. And so we then said, okay, everybody agrees that we need a much more significant investment in prevention. Of course, you know, that can be millions of dollars, that can be billions of dollars. How do you start to prioritize among the kinds of investments that you could make? And where could we start to say, hey, there might be the most significant bang for the buck in terms of investments? And I want to mention to you several areas that were identified as part of this process. First would be daycare and pre-K slots for high-risk children. You know, the benefits of this are just incredible. Of course, not only, you know, are there benefits for kids in terms of providing social and intellectual, you know, stimulation and engagement, but it also provides ways of monitoring children and monitoring their development, and of course can then identify if it appears that a child, you know, might be suffering in some way. So in terms of prevention, we thought that would probably be among the most important of the investments that need to be made. Second identified was cultural navigators to enable high-risk families to access the services that are already available. There are so many services available in different counties, and in a number of cases, there are just difficulties for high-risk families in terms of being able to access them. And so we obviously want to help in that regard. A third thing that came up quite frequently was the need for transportation for parents and children to needed services. Even when those services are available, you know, especially when you're dealing with families in low-income situations, if the transportation isn't available, then they're not going to be able to access the services. And, you know, I've heard from, you know, judges, others, you know, who have said, gee, I have this parent appearing before me, and this parent wants to do everything that I'm asking, but just isn't able to find the transportation in order to be able to access the kinds of things that need to be accessed. Another thing identified was legal assistance. And this is legal assistance for dealing with the non, you know, child welfare issues. You know, it might be a situation that you have a parent who has something on his or her record from 20 years ago that is standing in the way of being able to get a job and being able to improve the economic situation of the family. It might be an underlying landlord-tenant issue that is really holding the family back. The most significant kind of really sizable investment that everybody was able to agree on was a significant expansion of mental health services, right? Clearly, this is an area of very significant need. We identified that, of course, the needs are different, you know, in rural, suburban, and urban counties. Of course, one of the things we have learned as a result of the pandemic is that mental health services can now be made available, you know, by Zoom, so that can address some of the problems in some of the more sparsely populated areas. But we have kind of coalesced as a working group among these kind of priority investments to make the biggest difference in terms of prevention. And of course, we are identifying the need for stable funding, right? It does no good to have money available in a single year. The system needs to be able to rely on that money on an ongoing basis. And we had a lot of discussion about how the services should be provided, and a lot of consensus there again on using community-based groups and nonprofits. That we want families to feel that they can trust the entities that the services are coming from, and sometimes, as you know, because of either past historical or current experiences in terms of government, families might not always feel that way. So that was kind of the first area of most significant common ground. The second was, okay, sometimes prevention isn't going to work, and children and families need to enter the system. And we identified then several things that everybody seemed able to agree on. One, that whenever a family enters the system, it's really important what the front door is, right, to the system, namely how they're going to start interacting with that system. And there was a lot of consensus, again, on having that be founded in community-based nonprofits. There was also a lot of consensus that as an initial matter, that the system needs to do a comprehensive multi-generational assessment of the family. Because we obviously need to be realistic in terms of what kinds of services any given family might need, and what kinds of barriers there might be that might prevent those interventions from being able to be most successful. And so I know there has been a lot of debate, in terms of family assessment tracks versus investigation tracks, et cetera. And actually, this kind of coming together in terms of common ground basically says, we don't need to argue over that. We should actually all be able to agree on a broad-based assessment of a family coming into a system, and that the goal is to have continuing assessments, not just static assessments. Because of course, continuing assessments give them the ability to ratchet up or ratchet down the availability of needed services. Going together with that, of course, is providing greater flexibility to counties and others, who implement these programs in terms of the funding streams, right? We heard so many times of the fact that there is a need for flexibility to be able to tailor funding streams to the specific needs of individual families. This family might need rental assistance. This family might need, mental health services. This family might need transportation. This family might need substance abuse services. This family might need job training. Of course, other families might need, multiple services at once. And helping the system move toward a situation in which it is much easier for those on the ground to just be able to determine the tools the individual family needs, and then focus based on that, rather than having to worry about the requirements of this funding stream or that funding stream, is obviously really important. Another thing that actually at the beginning generated a lot of disagreement among different groups, but where we found common ground, was on kinship searches and how to do kinship searches. Because I think everybody agrees that you don't want to get into a situation where, let's say, a youth has been placed outside the family and then develops a relationship, for a year or two, or whatever it might be, and then all of a sudden, the availability of a kid becomes known, and you're then facing another difficult situation in terms of the kinds of trauma that a youth might be exposed to based on a change in the situation. And the best way to avoid that is, of course, to have active kinship searches very early on in the process. And the working group put a real emphasis on that. It identified that one problem that sometimes happens in kinship searches is that the effort is made in reaching out to kin to ask them whether they're willing to be permanent placement options, rather than also asking whether they will be temporary placement options. And so this proposal would actually say we have to make sure that kin are given or made aware of the fact that they can also volunteer to be temporary placement options, which of course sometimes then develop into more permanent placement options. We also identified that, sometimes kin might be very willing, and here I'm defining kin as very much an extended family, very willing, eager, able, but we don't make it easy for them, right? In terms of the forms that need to be completed and things like that. And so we've identified, that help needs to be provided to kin in terms of kind of jumping through some of the different hoops, but also help needs to be provided because let's say you might have a grandmother who says, gee, I'm willing or I not just willing, I would love to, take in these, 3 young grandchildren, but that grandmother might need to be assured that she can find daycare or pre-K for those grandchildren because she obviously can't lose her job as part of taking care of the children. Or the grandmother might need assistance in terms of finding a place that has a 3rd bedroom so that she can accommodate those children. We then address the question of, well, what happens, despite everybody's best efforts, there are certainly going to be cases when children need to be removed, from their homes, and how can we make that as minimally traumatic? We know that is traumatic, but how can we try to decrease the trauma of not just the removal, but then that continues as long as that separation, from siblings and from biological parents and others is in effect. And one thing that we really focused on, and this is something that actually has come up a lot when I have spoken to youth who have been in the system. One thing that has always struck me is they keep saying to me, while I was in the system, everyone who showed me any love or affection was being paid to do so. And now sometimes, frankly, that can be, unfair, right? I've known, foster parents, who just ooze love from every pore and are just, incredibly wonderful. And so for a foster child to sometimes say, oh, they're just doing it because they're being paid can obviously be unfair. But it is important that is sometimes how foster youth react. And so one of the and this, if you're maybe looking for an innovation, maybe this would be it. But on the other hand, this is not innovative at all because it draws from Native American, from African American, and other traditions. The idea would be that whenever a youth is removed from the home, that there would actually be created for that youth what is called a circle of support. That the circle of support would be, people from the, it could even be, biological parents who may not be able to provide a safe and secure environment for the youth, but may still be capable of providing love for that youth. But certainly then members of the family and the extended family and the community. And of course, if the youth is older, the youth can identify, oh, the parents of this friend of mine, on whose, couch I've sometimes slept, or, this music teacher or athletic coach or whatever it might be. But the idea would be that there would actually, as part of the system, be formally created this circle of support of people who would not be being paid, but would make clear their commitment to remain in touch with and maintain contact and support for this child, even if he or she might then face multiple placements in the system, to try to give some stability and some sense that there are people, who really do love and care for this child, even if they may not be in a situation to be able to become guardians or to house the child. That then led to also thinking about what are the best ways to reduce multiple placements. And here I know from my own experiences in terms of mentoring youth who have been in foster care, in some cases, I've mentored youth who, have spent years and years in foster care and can count the number of placements, not just on two hands, but, would actually need, the some of the toes on their feet as well. And of course, that kind of movement from place to place, when we think of the trauma and we think also of the impact that it has on a youth's ability to create meaningful attachment and relationships, of course, each switch in placement can really increase trauma. Now, understandably, there are cases in which placements need to be adjusted, right? And so there are a lot of situations in which multiple placements occur, and it's not that it's anybody's particular fault, but we did look for ways to limit this. And of course, the focus on kinship placement is one. One issue that has come up is, and I'd be interested in people's input on this, is should the system require a higher burden of proof in order to move a child from an out-of-home placement to another out-of-home placement if it is going to interrupt the school year? Should there be a stronger presumption that you cannot interrupt the school year? One thing that everybody agreed on was, of course, as mental health support becomes more available, that could help with some of these multiple placements, as will improving training, both for kin and foster parents, so that they are better equipped to deal with the emotional challenges of youth who are acting out. And another thing that we identified was the need to continue services after reunification. Because one of the things that leads to multiple placements is that youth get reunified with their families, and then when unfortunately that doesn't work, they then re-enter the system, with now another placement. And in fact, re-entry in foster care in Minnesota in 2018 was 15.9%, which is significantly higher than the federal performance standard of 8.3%. And one of the reasons that we've been able to identify, certainly for the failures of reunification, is that the way the system is currently structured, when reunification occurs, sometimes a whole series of services that were being provided all of a sudden disappear. And so it is clear that services need to continue after reunification. I saw somebody in the chat asking me to repeat those numbers, and actually these numbers are from 2018. They're actually, you can get them right on the DHS website. Re-entry in foster care in Minnesota in 2018 was 15.9%. The federal standard or average was 8.3%. Another area of agreement was on the need to ease the aging out process. If you look at the numbers in Minnesota, as you know, youth age out anywhere from age 18 to 21, depending on their particular situation. In Minnesota, within 4 years of aging out, 40% have experienced homelessness, and over 25% have become involved in the criminal justice system. I don't know about you, but those numbers just absolutely break my heart. On a national level, one national study found that 20 to 30% of the youth aging out nationally could not identify a single caring adult in their lives. And clearly, it should be unacceptable to all of us to have a situation in which youth are aging out of the system, and then nearly half of them are becoming homeless within a 4-year period. We identified several steps in this regard. One is, not surprisingly, the need to provide transitional resources for youth throughout their 20s. And also, and here I will, accept that this is obviously, close to my own heart. the need to provide mentoring for youth when they do age out. We'd actually like to get to a point where every youth in the system from age 15 and up is linked with a mentor who is trained and who is capable of just providing some of the personal and emotional continuing support that youth need, with youth knowing that that mentor won't disappear when all of a sudden the youth age out, which of course is sometimes the situation, you know, with somebody else in the system with whom a youth may have developed a really great relationship. There were two other areas where we identified common ground, but not in terms of a solution, but in terms of saying, hey, these are things that need to be looked at further. One is data practices and sharing. I think everybody agrees that the limits on data practices and the balance that they strike between the need for privacy and sharing with those for whom the information might be important, that we haven't necessarily gotten that balance right. Frankly, we were not able to figure out where that line should be drawn, but we want to highlight that as an area that needs further attention. And also, we want to highlight the need for a business process redesign that we heard from many involved in the system about processes that don't necessarily work as efficiently as they should. And of course, in this area, you know, we want to make sure that everybody's attention, time, energy, and resources can be devoted to the youth who are the focus. I actually think that that's a lot to agree on. And this is a wide range of groups who normally, I mean, if you think of the groups that are normally the players in this area, these are many of the groups that have pushed for what have become one house bills in the past, right? Because they were able to get it through one house and not another, not the other rather. And our thinking was, hey, if we could bring everybody together on these areas of common ground, then it makes it much more difficult, for those items that require legislative action, right? And there's still work to be done in terms of what would be the legislative changes that would be required, and in what cases is it regulatory changes, in what cases is it just policy or other kinds of changes. I should indicate one other thing that everybody agreed on was a need for expanded training, and there was agreement that really significant steps have been taken in this area, but we obviously have some suggestions in that area as well. But I don't want to take up too much time because I really want to get the benefit of your reactions and your advice on this. Does this strike you as a significant enough common ground that it really makes sense for us to move forward as a united community in terms of trying to implement, realizing that this is not the perfect solution from anybody's perspective, but that it could really move us forward. So having said that, I'm going to stop talking at you, and I'd really just like to hear your thoughts and your suggestions. And Stephanie, I don't know if you're calling on people or if people just want to speak up, which is fine with me.
Yep, folks can go ahead and speak up. We also have a question in the chat box. Oh, it says, Sarah said, eek, what were those numbers again? Yes. Lots of common ground.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for the lots of common ground message.
So go ahead, if you have a question for Mark, you can go ahead and ask it. Just make sure to unmute yourself. Oh, we do have a question from Lisa here in the chat box, Mark, if you want to take a look at that.
Yeah, asking about what kinds of data should be shared. And the truth is, Lisa, I don't have an answer to that. I've been listening to a lot of different groups and different perspectives, right? And I'll just give you like one example that was suggested, and this was from the it was either from a superintendent or from a principal at a school, I don't remember which, who said, look, there's sometimes a situation where, let's say the police are called to a home one evening, I mean, let's say it's a domestic violence incident, or could be for a whole series of reasons, that a child from that family then comes to the school the next morning, and we don't find out about that until the child has acted up, gotten into a situation of discipline, etc., and then we start looking at it and realize that what was going on was that the child had just experienced a very difficult, at the least a very difficult experience, and perhaps a very traumatic experience. And if we had known that ahead of time, we would have been able to take proactive steps with that child in order to help avoid the situation in that morning in the school. Now, of course, there's pushback, right, on that, right, which says that, hey, wait a minute, the member of the family is saying, why should now the school know that I was, that the police were called to my home, et cetera. But that's just one example of the kinds of things that have come up in the conversations in terms of saying, hey, we're not sure where to draw the line, but we're not convinced we're drawing it in the right place. Lisa, any reaction to that?
Well, I haven't dealt with it on the foster care side of things. I've dealt with it more on the Child Protection Task Force. Sorry, I'm trying to start my video. It's not showing. There we are. Nope. And the question there was whether or what the recommendation was, whether there would be more data sharing between child protection and the criminal system. So you knew if a kid was being put in a situation where a parent had a criminal history. And I don't know much about foster care and how much that's evaluating. If they're, I think they look back history, but what if something happens currently, as you say, is that going to be known to the foster care system?
Yeah, this is, I think, I'm very careful about where I can kind of represent the kind of the informal working group reached agreement and where not. And the agreement we reached on this was that there needs to be an effort to figure out where to draw the line, but there was not agreement. I guess there was just agreement on, we don't think it's in the right place, but we're not quite sure where the right place is. And we think that based on the experiences that we've now had, let's say over the past, 5 to 10 years, that we should take another look at where the line is drawn.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Has DHS been involved in many of these discussions? And if so, what kind of response have you received from DHS?
So there were some people from DHS who were on the informal working group. Actually, one in particular I can think of off the bat, and actively participated. Again, they were not there as a formal representative. I did have some conversation with some of the political appointees at DHS who, and others who are aware of this and have expressed general support. Frankly, I think until we get to a point where, and I've shared with them, draft documents and things like that. And I think it's fair to say that they've certainly expressed support of many of the ideas in it. We haven't gotten to the stage, of actually drafting legislation, right? And it's normally when you draft the legislative language that then you find out, right, who your real, allies, or opponents might be. But so far the response from DHS has been positive. I haven't, and here I'm just talking, very candidly. I've also made clear to DHS that I don't think it makes sense for this to be something, as much as they might support it ultimately, it doesn't make sense for this to be coming from them, right? That I think it's really important that this would be coming from this informal working group and community leaders, you know, on a very nonpartisan basis. Does that answer your question, Greg? Great. I think I saw something in the chat. Did somebody make a comment about the circles of support?
Yes, I did. I'm a guardian, a volunteer guardian at Lightham, and I can think of so many kids who have spoken about not having support and wishing that they had support, as well as family members who have felt cut out of being able to support. So I think that sense, especially for teenagers, of there's nobody who cares about me or will care about me depending on what happens, is so significant. So to find a way to make circles of support easy to join, and a question that's always asked, is a very exciting idea to me. So thanks for that.
Oh, well, thank you. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, as we get to the next level of detail, you know, that we're struggling with is, okay, exactly how would you structure them and what would be the presumptions? One of the ideas that has been suggested is that actually you would have, you know, the court kind of bless the circle of support, right? To make clear that, oh, these are people who are authorized to have access, et cetera. There's a question whether, do we structure in such a way to say people in the following categories are presumed that they will be able to have access, but then give an opportunity, let's say for the county or social worker or whatever, to say, oh no, there's a reason why it doesn't make sense for this person to be in that or not. That is kind of the working assumption that we're going on at the moment. You know, I had some very helpful conversations, you know, with, you know, Victor Wiest, you know, at the Zero Abuse Project, getting his input on this, right? Because we want to make sure, you know, one thing that he brought up was, okay, let's say that there is an aunt who is very supportive and very loving of that child, but that the child is being called to testify in a child abuse case against the uncle, and you want to make sure that the aunt is not going to be somehow pressuring the child not to testify, you know. So, I mean, there clearly has to be room for flexibility, but I think the kind of presumption of, hey, there needs to be this circle, I think is on a certain level the most important. Judy, you seem to be shaking your head in a positive way.
I think just knowing that there was that circle would make a huge difference to kids. Of course, the kid would have to be involved in choosing that circle. And knowing teenagers, they will at times want people and at times not want people. And I get that. But in some way, formalizing that, and of course, people need to be able to say, no, this person can't be in that. But just for a kid to know that there is even a group called a circle of support and that they're not out there alone. One of my kids who just turned 18 recently said to me, there is what you said, there's no adult in my life who cares. That is not being paid to care. So to know that that group is there would be highly significant. But I think the kid has to have the ability to
the agency,
exclude. Yeah,
agreed. I mean, frankly, it's really easy when you're talking about kids, you know, 12 and up or 14 and up. It's really easy. The challenge is when you're talking about a 3-year-old, right? And I think that's where we have the need for certain presumptions. But yeah, to me, frankly, the circle of support is important for all of the reasons that you identified. It's also important because I think one of the things that's happened in the system, just as a general matter, is we've forgotten that one of the most important things is kids need to be loved. You know, we have focused so much, and appropriately so, you know, you can't be loved if you're not alive, right? And you can't be loved if you're not safe and secure, et cetera. But being safe and secure is not enough. You also have to be loved. And I see the reason why I'm so passionate about it is I see the circle of support as saying we're also going to start focusing on how do we make sure that these kids get the kind of love that they deserve. And I think I saw that I think Jessica Rogers mentioned in the chat something about an effort at C2I starting with the you know, in terms of their own circles of support, and I should recognize Jessica as well for her role on the informal working group. Jessica, I don't know if you want to say something about the effort at C2I.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So we just entered into a partnership with Ada Young, the Sauer Family Foundation, the Schultz Foundation, and I'm missing one organization, oh, Ampersand Families. And it's to pilot the Circle of Support program, if you will. And the goal is to make sure that each young person has at least 5 unpaid people in their life, healthy unpaid people in their lives when they age out of the foster care system. And so one thing that we've started doing is doing quarterly Circle of Support meetings, which are similar to youth transition conferences where the youth, it's really youth led. So it's all centered around them and their goals that they want to achieve. But we're trying to teach them that their circles of support may change as they get older. So when they start at 14, 15, it may be like a Judy at the table, a foster parent, someone from the school, maybe an aunt who is somewhat involved. But then as they achieve different goals and as they get older, their circles of support may change, and maybe one of the mentors from the mentoring program as well. And so the goal again is to make sure they have 5 unpaid people in their lives, teaching them how to advocate for what they want, making sure that everyone in their circle is aware of what's going on so the young person doesn't have to tell their story over and over again, and also to hold the circle of support accountable for helping that young person achieve their goals. So it's several different levels to it, but it's super important work that we're formalizing. And there's a database that we started using called Connect Our Kids that is free for anyone to use, which is tied to the funding with the foundations. And this pilot is to be able to say, hey, you know, when I was 14, I was connected to Judy, who was my guardian ad litem, but I have no idea how to find her. I know that we had a great relationship. And so helping them process that and find those people. And it's a way to map out all the different people and who they are and where they are in their lives. So it's pretty exciting work.
Great, thank you, Jessica.
Thanks, Mark.
Other thoughts? Is there something that I mentioned as common ground where somebody has disagreement or concern?
I don't have disagreement, but I'd like to bring up a point about the sharing of information. When Dee Wilson presented the results of the Casey Foundation report at the County Commissioners, he called the HIPAA laws being used a red herring. And it is my experience that, as a guardian ad litem, that it's just common that people are uncomfortable speaking about, even if they could. And what's hurting us at one level, and it's a big thing to me, is that the public is so unaware. And so Dee Wilson was pointing out that you don't need to use names. We don't need to point a finger. We need to explain the landscape and the circumstances. I've had the 1-paragraph reports on incoming for the need for guardians ad litem every month. And, that short paragraph just scares the hell out of me. I mean, the dangerous circumstances, there's no names, but it's the sort of thing that I think it's critical for us as people that know what's going on to be more talkative. And it is uncomfortable. And I know that it's not always loved or appreciated, but without public support, a lot of things we're talking about aren't going to happen because people don't vote for them. They don't perceive a problem because it doesn't get in a newspaper, unless someone dies. I mean, these kids pretty much are all alone, and the only people that know are the people involved in court and child protection. So that's the primary thing. And I guess I wanted to draw attention to money. And that in one of the absurd cases I worked on, they took and put 7 kids in foster homes, one family. The older daughter was trying to put the family together again. And I was chartered to not let her make that happen. I hate myself. It happened quickly. I was in the middle of the years that I spent as an active guardian. And I'd never do that again, because I know how hard she worked at that, and the things you're talking about are real. I mean, that family connection, and she was a driving force, and there was a father that had a criminal background, but he was a pretty good man. I'll quit, but I just want to know that I support the things you're doing. I appreciate you.
Thanks, and Mike, I know how active you have been in other efforts in this realm as well, and thank you for those efforts as well. And I think I saw something. Was there something in the chat? I think asking about poor literacy skills in the parents. That is actually not something that has come up in the conversations of the informal working group when they've been identifying key things that we need to focus on when we've been trying to identify, again, where we could get the greatest bang for the buck. That has not come up, but I open it. If somebody, Mike, I don't know if you're raising your hand there. If somebody wants to address that.
You've touched a nerve. We just started a program for foster kids, financial literacy. It's a 1-year peer group. We actually give them a little funding so they can use the tools. It's not a classroom setting. We try to solve problems and work with them where they are. So if you're interested, on our website at invisibleChildren.org, I just couldn't not say something about it. It is new. We're starting at a church in Golden Valley, but the next ones are going to be, it's foster kids. That's where we want to be, because they do miss a lot.
Okay. Great. Any other? Let's see. There may have been. Stephanie, are you monitoring the chat? I may have missed anything. I don't know if I missed something there. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I'm watching them.
Great. Well,
Mark, I'm sorry, I had a question.
Yeah.
My name's Stephanie as well. I'm a Ramsey County attorney, a child protection attorney. And I had just wondered if in your conversations at all, licensing requirements for things like family foster care had come up.
Yes.
Because I think that personally what I see a lot, and I see kind of parents and social workers, the agencies, with their hands behind their backs, because we can't place kids with parents. We're time barred on how long we can place kids with parents. We're held back by the safety aspect of putting kids back into the home. And there is no concept of family foster care in Minnesota. Really, the only situation where a parent can be in a supportive living environment with a child would be in kind of like a chemical dependency type of setting, and those are very limited and
few and far between. Yeah.
So I was just wondering if that was a concept that came up.
Yeah, it definitely came up, and we actually had a lot of conversation about it. And then as we were having conversation, there was also an effort going on in the legislature, right, to make some changes to the licensing standards, which were recently adopted. And there are certainly people on the working group who feel that we need to go much further in terms of making further changes, but there were others who felt that those changes went far enough. So it kind of slipped off of the list of, if not for those changes, it would have been in the list of here's an area of common ground. It slipped from the common ground list to the list of an area where some members feel really strongly that we need to make further changes, but where there's no longer common ground because of the recent changes. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks. And I know, since you're from Ramsey County, John Troy has been very helpful, and I know has actually been just personally really supportive of some of these efforts. And we know
Yes.
you're doing some really neat stuff in that office.
Absolutely. A lot of these things I think Ramsey's already doing, so that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I mean, and I think actually, and maybe we should, move to end on that note. When I present this to various places, sometimes the reaction is people say, oh, we're doing a lot of these things. And the goal is not to say, oh, just hear new things. But what I also hear is we're doing a lot of these things, but we're limited because there's a lack of resources and there's a lack of stability in terms of those resources. And also when we're doing these things, we're kind of doing them as Band-Aids on broader systemic problems. And gee, it would be nice if we could shift some other parts of the system. So this is really an effort to kind of do a more systemic shift that would then provide some of the additional resources to be able to expand some of those efforts. And I think somebody's raising your hand.
Yeah, I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Yes. And I know you've said this, but when did these working groups start again?
Okay, so it started, well, I can tell you, I went on sabbatical in July 1 of 2019, and the working group started in the fall.
Of 2019.
Of 2019.
2019.
Yeah.
And how often are you meeting now?
Well, we were meeting about once a month. We then, with the pandemic, I mean, we continued to meet over Zoom, but then we have met much less frequently within the last year because frankly, we had kind of reached a certain stage, and then it was on me to start reaching out to some groups that had not yet been involved. Actually, we have a meeting coming up in about 2 weeks, which at which point we will hopefully, I think the draft, I mean, we've kind of, we've condensed all what I said into like a 13-page single-space draft. And I'm hoping that at this meeting, I'll get kind of a final sign-off from the informal working group. Not that it's a perfect document, but that we're all comfortable enough with it to kind of try to move forward in terms of the next step with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Mark, we have a comment in the chat box. Hello, this is my first time experience. I appreciate the work you and other people have been doing. I agree the circle of support will be beneficial to the kids, presuming it is all about positive experiences for the kids. Has an issue about making sure the right people become foster parents for the kids been addressed?
It has been addressed in the context of, trying to find kin right first in terms of foster, in terms of out-of-home placement possibilities. It has also been addressed in the context of the need to provide additional training for foster people who do end up becoming foster parents and having continuing training and continuing support. But those are the general ways in which it has come up. It's an imperfect document, right? In that we were trying to kind of identify, here are the main big things that we need to change. And then there are a series of next level things that we would hope would come next. And I think that was probably an example of something that we had thought of as maybe a next level, if I could be so bold. But that is the context in which that has come up.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Mark today? This has been just a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for your questions.
I'm one of the other Marks.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious how often drug convictions or drug addictions come up in the families that you encounter?
You mean in the families that I encounter personally, or you mean in terms of the?
Not you personally, but in your these cases.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no doubt. I mean, and you can actually see DHS, has, on their website, there are breakdowns, right, in terms of, youth who are placed into the system, kind of what the underlying issue was, in the family. I think everybody agrees that substance abuse services are very important to be provided and expanded as part of any kind of significant change in the system. And I think it was Stephanie from Ramsey County Attorney's Office who mentioned the possibilities in terms of chemical and substance abuse treatment that can be done in a residential setting, so that certainly one of the problems is, as I'm sure you're aware, is, okay, you start providing that kind of treatment, and if you have separated the parent from his or her children, there is a real amount of pressure on them to leave the treatment facility and to go home and be with the kids. And there are, I think it's just 4 or 5 the last time I looked. Somebody on this may know well better than I do. I think just 4 or 5 in the state facilities where you can actually provide substance abuse treatment and also have young kids in residence at the same time, which of course then helps to keep the parent participating. Judy, I see your picture just showed up. Is that because you're preparing to say something to say that that's accurate or not?
Sorry, yes, actually it's accurate, but I think, and Stephanie might be able to confirm this, that even if a parent does go into chemical dependency treatment with their child, the clock for the out-of-home days does not stop, which is a barrier.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that we have struggled with on the working group, and Judy has been part of it, and thank you for your efforts on it. We discussed whether having a clock, makes sense or not, and should, the time periods be expanded? Should they be contracted? And that was another area where actually we did not reach common ground, because frankly, it's really tough. And, there are some situations in which you feel you want to give more time for various things that need to happen. And there are other times where you feel differently. So that is something that remains an issue. But Mark, I think we certainly have identified substance abuse as one of the areas where there needs to be flexible fundings so that counties would be able to address it more effectively.
The other question I had was, how often does this come up? What's the frequency of drug addiction or substance abuse is part of the original problem that created the child abuse issue investigation?
I can sort of address that issue. I worked in the child protection system for 40 years before I retired a few years ago, and I don't have the actual numbers off the tip of my fingers here, but I'd say well over 50, probably pushing 2/3 of our families, chemical dependency was either the primary or the secondary reason for the child protection involvement with the family. And on the timeframes issue, personal opinion, the timeframes for effective chemical dependency treatment and the timeframes for children in out-of-home placement in terms of reunification requirements kind of work against each other, because effective treatment takes longer oftentimes than the requirements for reunification within the juvenile court system.
And treatment services are limited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, this is
not just the primary treatment, it's also the follow-up, the aftercare, the reintroduction back into their community. I mean, to really make a break from your chemical dependency takes more than just a 30-day program. It's a process that takes months and years.
Yeah, I have friends in the AA system that have been there for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and to add to that, one of the things that makes things difficult in our system is that when you are part of recovery, relapse is part of recovery. And you then, and the way the system is currently structured, relapse is not necessarily seen as a part of that progression. It can actually really, really mess things up in some serious ways.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Great. I think, Stephanie, did you just indicate we're over the time limit?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to note that, you know, folks have to get going. We understand we're a few extra minutes over, but this has just been just a really lively and interesting conversation. So I appreciate everyone sticking around here with us. We can take maybe one more. Jessica, do you have a question or comment? Oh, I love the wave. All right. That's right. Thanks. Okay, great. Well, Mark, if it's okay with you, I think maybe we'll close things up here.
Great. Yes, and let
right.
me just say to the other Mark who asked about substance abuse, if you have some suggestions that you think we should be incorporating in that regard, please pass them on.
Yeah. Yeah,
Great.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you'll join us next Wednesday at our fall fundraiser virtual gathering. Again, this is Stephanie McCorkle for Safe Passage for Children, Minnesota. And thanks again, Mark Gordon, for sharing all of your time and your expertise with us today. We really appreciate you being here. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yep. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.